Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
So we have this week Mishpatim, a little different in the content from the previous parshas. The Torah is very, uneven in that sense. There are some sections that seem very legalistic, like this one. There are some that are very much narrative. Of course, we know the Torah is a seamless whole, so its importance itself makes us think about what is the substance of the Torah. People say it's stories, it's laws, it's history. Of course, we have to look for what's the underlying essence of the Torah, especially when we have such a contrast between what we've been doing until now and what we seem to be doing now. Obviously, the context of this week's parasha is very logical in the sense that we just, and last week, read about how the Jews got the Torah after they came out of Egypt. The entire demand that Moshe brought to the king of Egypt repeatedly from the beginning and all the way to the end was let my people go and let them serve me. So the understanding was not that we're looking for freedom so that they can do whatever they want, but they want to be free of...
Excuse me, I think someone needs to mute themselves, maybe another student. I hear people talking in the background.
Okay, let me see what I... okay, yeah, I think that's going to stop soon. There is some background noise, but hopefully that will go away soon. Are you able to hear? Are you able to hear what I'm saying at least?
No. Oh yes.
Okay, fine. So we'll try to make the best of it. Okay. So, anyways, the Torah. The Torah is obviously the Torah is itself. The Torah talks about how the Jews got the Torah, which is interesting to think about. Like, when the Jews stood at Mount Sinai, and they still accept the Torah, but the Torah includes everything that they're reading about, including the story of how the Jews stood at Mount Sinai and got the Torah. But most of all, we might, not most of all, but essentially, the word Torah itself, like the word Morah, like the word Hora'ah, all of these words mean instruction, guidance, teaching. Morah is a teacher, and the Torah is teaching or guidance. Lahora means to show, to guide. It's showing somebody the way to get somewhere. If you give somebody directions to get from one place to another, that's also Lahora, to show and to guide and to instruct. So Torah is instruction. It's the instruction book for life. And if we want to think about what the Torah is, we have to understand that essentially the Torah is God's instructions to us. And anything in the Torah, in one way or another, is supposed to help us understand what we need to be doing. Like that was what Moshe said to the angels. And the Medrash recounts that when he went up to heaven to get the Torah, and the angels say, "Why are you taking that with you? It belongs up here." Hashem tells Moshe, respond to that argument. Moshe tells the angel, the Torah tells us to honor your father and mother. Do you have fathers and mothers? And he gives us other examples of areas in which the Torah's instructions don't pertain to you as angels, and therefore the Torah doesn't really belong with you, it belongs to us. Right? So, it's understood that if we think about what is the most obvious or natural aspect of the Torah, it's those parts that give us the mitzvot, the 613 commandments, is kind of the obvious subject matter that the Torah ought to be discussing. Rashi says, it's the first comment of Rashi in the entire Torah. When Rashi comments on the first sentence of the Torah, Bereshit, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and Rashi says, well, the Torah really should have started much later. The Torah should have begun with Achronesh Elochem. When Moshe came to the Jews in Egypt and said they're about to leave this land, and the first mitzvah that they were given as a nation was the mitzvah of the calendar, calculating the months based on the cycles of the moon. Chodesh Nisan, the month of Pesach, was the first month, and that's where the Torah ought to begin. Rashi gives a reason that the Torah starts from Bereshit. From the Bereshit, he said Hashem wanted to make it clear that when the Jews inherit and take over the land of Israel, nobody should accuse them of stealing the land belonging to other people. That resonates with us today, I think, as much as it ever did. No one should accuse the Jews of taking land that doesn't belong to them, because Hashem created the world and He orchestrates all the events of history, and He decides who gets what. At various points, He gave the land to the Canaanites, and later He decided to give it to the Israelites, and nobody can second guess God's plan. So that's the reason the Torah starts from an earlier point. But clearly, what she's telling us is that if you think of the Torah as the history of the world or the history of the Jewish nation, that's the wrong way to think about it. If anything, we would look at the Torah and say the Torah is a book of laws. We should start with the first law, all this narrative, and it has to be a moral lesson. So Rashi tells us that it's interesting to think of what Rashi means and how Rashi's answer explains why we have all those pages and pages of stuff. Yeah, Hashem gave the land of Israel to the Jews, so that's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the answer is, but we do know that all the stories and the lessons from the book of Bereshit and the book of Shemot is full of narratives that tell us things of moral significance. The story of the first sin, the Garden of Eden, the story of Abraham and his great work in recognizing the Creator and teaching everyone else about the Creator, the acts of chesed, of kindness. Hashem's promise to him that he would become the father of the Jewish nation. Yitzchak, Yaakov, 12 sons of Yaakov, all these stories are filled with lessons. And they're also, therefore, laws in a certain sense, because they teach us how we should behave. Everything in the Torah is instructions. It's even when it talks about the genealogy of Esau, the twin brother of Yaakov, so it says, Timnah Haisaf Pilegesh Elifaz ben Esau. Timnah was a concubine of Elifaz, son of Esau. It's hard to think of a more seemingly peripheral detail in the Torah. What concern is it to us that Timnah was a concubine of Elifaz, the son of Esau? And yet, the rabbis tell us a very interesting history about Timnah. Because Timnah was mentioned as the sister of Lotan, who was a chief, a person of prominence in that tribe, because Timnah herself was of an aristocratic background. And how did she end up being a concubine of Eliphaz? Not seemingly such an impressive station in life. And the answer is that Timnah wanted very much to join the family of our forefathers, Abraham and Yitzchak, and she tried to make connections within the family, but she was rejected. They did not deem her worthy of marrying into that spiritual family. So finally she said, if I can't become a member of the family of Yitzchak and Yaakov, let me go to Esau's, the Esau branch of the family, and if I can't be a wife, let me be a concubine. And that was how badly Timnah wanted to join how prominent was people's appreciation of the greatness of the family of our forefathers. So it teaches us, first of all, how, because of their spiritual greatness, how well recognized it was, and how much people who were presumably not people with great spiritual background, they were pagans, and they were not members of the family, and yet they were attracted to that and desired it very greatly. And we find that Abraham, when he went to bury his wife Sarah, was told by the Mishpatim, who were pagans, and they said, "You're a prince of God, bury your wife anywhere you choose, no one will withhold the burial plot," because they recognize the greatness of these people. True spiritual greatness that shines through, and it can be appreciated by anyone who has a human soul. But we also learned something else. It says that Timnah, who ends up being the concubine of Eliphaz, son of Esav, ends up bearing a child, and that child is Amalek. Amalek, of course, we just encountered 2 weeks ago. Amalek attacks the Jews after they crossed the Red Sea and goes down in history as the eternal enemy of God and the Jewish people. They become the arch enemy. Haman, the villain of the fun story, is a descendant of Amalek. Amalek becomes the anti-Israel. They become the people who are eternally at war with Hashem and His people. And this is the result of the rejection of Timnah and the fact that she was not accepted into the family of our patriarchs. The ultimate consequence of that was that it came back to bite us in the form of Amalek. And there's no question, I believe it's the author of Habakkuk, that there's no question that if Timnah wanted so badly to join the family of our other, and they who reached out to everyone and tried to bring everyone under the wings of the divine presence certainly would have accepted her and embraced her if they thought there was any possibility that she was qualified and that she could join their family as she desired. Obviously, they felt that spiritually she wasn't the right caliber for that role, and it was not out of any lack of desire to bring her in. It just seemed not suited. And yet, we see that the result came back to haunt them. So we have to be very careful before assessing that someone isn't suitable to join. When someone comes with a true desire, well, we don't know, I guess, how true her desire was. She certainly desired it and probably had something of the right reason. Perhaps her desire wasn't totally sincere, or perhaps it was, and she simply wasn't of the right caliber. And yet, it was ultimately, there were consequences that haunt us throughout the generations because of the rejection of Timnah. So it shows that even the most peripheral detail of an obscure genealogical figure with seemingly no relevance to our lives, and yet at the end of the Torah there is a lesson, there is a message there. And everything in the Torah has to be understood in that context. As a matter of fact, we're told, this is a comment, an iconic commentary by the Maggid Mishnah, who is one of the early commentators on Rambam in the works of Maimonides. And he makes the following observation. Rambam has obviously a comprehensive code of Jewish law. It's based on the Talmud and the Gemara, as he, writing many centuries after the Gemara, he organized and codified the bottom line legal conclusions that can come from the Gemara and from the later scholarship. He put together his own work of Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah, and he had many sections covering many aspects of Jewish law. There's a section on monetary law, governing people's dealings with each other. And within that section, there's the law of Shekhinah, laws of neighbors. There are a lot of laws that govern people who own and live on adjacent properties and how they have to behave towards one another. There's an entire chapter on a kind of obscure law called Dina Devar Mitzvah. And basically, Dina Devar Mitzvah is discussed in the Talmud in detail. And the law says that if someone is selling a piece of real estate, a house or a field, anything of that sort, the first right to purchase that property belongs to the next door neighbor. In other words, if I'm selling a house or a field, and the next door neighbor wants to buy it, he should have the first right to buy that house or that field, because there's obviously there's a specific advantage that the neighbor has to own two properties next door to each other, and no one else can have the same benefit. The law actually addresses, it's not the seller who's down by this, it's only the buyer. If someone sees that a house is for sale, and they want to put in a bid, but they see that the next door neighbor is trying to put in the effort to buy the same property, they're supposed to step away and withdraw their offer in favor of the person next door. There's a lot of laws governing. Obviously, it can't be an unfair disadvantage to anyone. Obviously, if the person wants to pay more money, and there can be different considerations that affect this law. So there's a lot of discussion in detail about these laws, and there's one question that we're left with after going through this entire section. I believe there's an entire chapter of the Rambam discussing these laws. The question is, what is the basis for this law? There is no scriptural quote. Nowhere in the Torah is such a law discussed. And this parsha, as Mishpatim, it's the most obvious source for a lot of the laws that govern monetary relationships between people. It's not the only place, but basic laws of damage. A lot of what we talk about in Masechet Avakama, of Mitzvah, these Talmudic sections that everyone studies that deal with lost objects and disputed ownership and damages, and a lot of it's here in this week's parasha and other places in the Torah, but nowhere in the Torah is there any discussion about who has first right of purchasing a real estate property. So the Rambam Mishnah says the following: our Torah, in its perfection, has given us some very specific laws, obviously, some more general laws, and then some very general principles that really are so open-ended that it's hard to even put a concrete definition of them in any way. So, for example, we have very specific laws, like send away the mother bird before you take the egg. It's pretty specific. There's some general laws, like honor your father and mother. It's general, but you kind of get the idea. But then he says there are laws, do what's right and good. So do what's right and good, what does that mean? He said basically it means to be a good person and act with good character towards others in every way. Kidoshim tihiyu, be holy. What does that mean? He said it means basically that we should live an elevated lifestyle and not be hedonistic and not be self-indulgent, to live on a higher spiritual plane. So what is these laws seem so general, it's almost as if they have no meaning. It's the kind of things that you'll find, there are ideas and statements that can get bandied about. I guess we call them platitudes. Kind of thing that if you go to a home goods store, you'll find them, printed on a mirror that you can hang in your kitchen, or on a set of towels, kind of these generic words of wisdom that end up as folk things. And no one takes them seriously because everyone knows them and they don't really have much impact on our lives because they're platitudes. They just do what's right and good. So when the Torah tells us laws like this, there obviously is something profound. But even when the Torah tells us something very specific, like don't mix meat and milk. I studied Shulchan Aruch, and when we take my rabbinics exam, there's a lot of information about what it means to not mix meat and milk. 6 scholarly volumes, large pages, lots of fine print, and to get a real mastery of it, it takes years of study. And then Torah tells us these other statements to do what's right and good. It seems to be almost, well, what is there to say? And, what does that mean other than very generic? So the Magen Mishnah explains that the Torah gives us the general principles, and it doesn't give us the applications, but it leaves it up to us to discover the applications, to concretize how we'll apply these laws in our lives. And in some cases, the rabbis stepped in and offered us some applications. In some cases, they turned them into laws. Other cases, they did them as recommendations. In some cases, they were encouraged people who want to live on a higher plane, or things that should be done under ideal circumstances. And that's how he explained, in his context, the laws of the neighbor buying the real estate purchase first. That's an example of the rabbi stepping in and saying, when the Torah tells you to behave in a good and proper way towards other people, this is an example of that. And as you can see, not only is it not generic, but the rabbis actually came up with a very specific body of law, an entire chapter in Rambam, with all of the commentary and all of the material that evolved from that, and they discussed, the Rambam himself serves as a springboard for further discussions and further analysis. All of that comes from the rabbis taking a situation that comes up in everyday life and applying the Torah's principles, doing what's right and good. And the rabbis do this for us sometimes, and that's how we're supposed to understand laws like this. Laws that don't seem to have a concrete source in the Torah can be understood as emanating from these principles that the Torah gave us, which may be general, but they are meant to be applied in specific ways in areas throughout our lives. So, as whenever you explain, there's something very profound that the Mishnah is telling us if we think about the implications of his words. Laws like be good, be nice to other people, be holy people, we tend to think of those things as ethical principles. Again, because they don't really have concrete applications in the Torah's own text, we tend to think of them as guides to how to be a good person. And we're supposed to call them their own applications of basically the ethics principle, the principle of being a nice person. And therefore, kind of like the difference between Pirkei Avos and other parts of the Mishnah. Pirkei Avos is filled with inspiring and encouraging maxims and proverbs and things like that. If I am not for myself, who is for me? If I am for myself, what am I? I think if not now, then when? As opposed to the rest of the Mishnah, which is all about laws. This is impure, this is pure, this is kosher, this is not kosher. This person owes money, that person owes money. But that's not what the Magen Mishnah says. He doesn't say that, the Torah tells us to be a good person, which isn't really a law. It's more like a philosophy, as opposed to the rest of the Torah, which is very specific laws. Magen Mishnah says, what he actually says, is that the Torah gave us some laws that are specific and concrete, and other laws that are more open-ended, and the applications have to be determined by us. In other words, it isn't that being a good person or being a holy person is less of a law. It's just as much of a law as just a law that presents in a different form. The fact that we don't have a concrete definition for what it means to be holy, what it means to be a nice person, doesn't mean it's less of an obligation. So we tend to think of ethical things like being a nice person as opposed to law. If you ask somebody by today's definition, so law is things that you get arrested if you don't keep. And ethics are things that, if you're not ethical, I may not invite you to my next party. But they're very different. Laws are obligatory, and ethics are just recommendations. You got to keep the law to be a citizen of good standing and not to end up in jail. But you got to be ethical in order to have people want to associate with you. But the Magen Mishnah is telling us differently. He's saying the Torah's ethical principles are mandatory and obligatory, like all other principles. But the Torah says that we can't give you concrete definitions. We'll have to leave it up to you. Which means that Pirkei Avos, using that example, if you're learning Mishnah Sanhedrin or Mishnah Bava Kama or Masechah Shabbos or Pirkei Avos, it's all law. When Hillel said, "If not now, then when?" or the rabbi said, "Don't say I will study when I have time. You may not have time. Those are laws. They're laws, but they're laws that are not defined in a precise way other laws. So that means that when we think about the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law that governs how to keep Milk and Meat separate, and we think about the amount of information that's there and the level of scholarship that you need to master the laws effectively, you have just as much wisdom and just as much information is needed to a proper grasp and understanding of how to be a good person, how to be a holy person. If anything, you need more, because considering the lack of specific and complete information, that means you need to completely generate the applications and the specific context for these laws on your own. So whatever level of scholarship and wisdom and deep understanding is needed to understand the laws of kosher and how to keep the separate foods from milk and meat, you need much more scholarship underneath to understand the proper applications of good behavior, being a nice person, being a kind person, because those laws don't even have specific guidelines. It's not like you can say, this much meat or this much milk, do this with the pot. These are completely open-ended, and it requires that much more degree of scholarship. And this is really, when it comes down to it, the introductory, the mission statement of the Mitzvot Hashem, and the path of the just. And he says that this famous slim volume has become kind of the centerpiece of the entire body of Muslim literature in Jewish tradition. All the laws of ethics and self-improvement. This was written in the 1700s. I've only placed this book on a pedestal and said that this author was someone that his only one himself would have looked up to, would have wanted to study from. And the Mishpatim explains in the introduction the purpose of writing the book, and he says, you may not find a lot of information in this book that you don't know. You may read it once and walk away learning little that you didn't already know before you learned the book. But the real benefit from this book is based on repetition and review and study. Because the fact is that the information in this book, it's ideas and facts that everybody knows, but somehow very few people actually put into practice. People don't really live by these principles even though they know them. And he says these are the principles that he's talking about are very basic things. Love God, fear God, keep all the mitzvahs, and serve Him with all your heart. These are things that everyone says are the most important things. And yet, how many of us feel that we've adequately mastered these principles? So he says, most of us assume that because we know what these things mean, well, whether we keep them or not, learning about it, reading about it again isn't going to do much, because what's there to know? You should love God and fear God. Either you do or you don't. He says that's a mistake, because considering the fact that we don't have these things naturally as part of our makeup, the only way to master them is to study them, to engage our minds and our hearts in analyzing, in getting a deep understanding of the principles, learning what they're really about. Just because we know the kind of a general principle and the generic non-specific way doesn't mean that we truly understand it on a deep level. And the truth is, if anything, it's the opposite. It says, "Hey, Yirat Hashem hichachla." Behold, the fear of God is wisdom. The rabbi said, "Hain." The word "hain" is a word that can mean one. The fear of God is the one true wisdom. I mean, if you think about all the different forms of wisdom that exist, physics and astronomy, and history and mathematics and literature, and even Torah wisdom, halacha and agada and gemara, the one area, if there's one area above all, and more than anything else, that can be called wisdom, it's the fear of Hashem. That's the one area which nobody feels really requires a lot of wisdom, because, well, what's there to know? You fear God, that's it. Do it, you don't do it, but we all know what it is. That's a mistake. These things all require study. They all require intense learning and deep learning and intellectual work and study and repetition in order to truly master them. So that's the real takeaway is that when we read Mishpatim and we read about all the laws and all the detailed and complex laws that pertain to things that we know, who owes money to whom and how much money, and all the technicalities that anyone who studies Talmud knows and understands how subtle and nuanced it can be, how intellectually stimulating, how much complexity and complicated calculations and abstract principles. If that's true, in the laws that we do know about, so those parts of the Torah which don't seem like laws, they seem like stories, they seem like interesting history, we have to understand that we need to work as hard, that much harder, to extract the law from those principles, because those stories are certainly laws as well, but they don't look like laws, and therefore the work that we have to do, if anything, is greater in those cases. We have to look at the stories and extract the laws from them. So, for example, if we read about how Abraham invited in his guests, that's a law. It's a law that how to treat guests. But it's not a law in the sense that this is the law. The Torah doesn't say you must feed your guests this and that and the other, like Abraham did. It just tells us a story because it's teaching us a principle about how to approach the concept of hospitality. But no one's going to say that we're obligated to do what Abraham did. We're not on that level. We have to be able to say we understand an overarching principle about how to treat other people, and then we take it back to our own lives and say, where am I? Who am I? How do I fit into this picture? How do I apply the events that took place in Abraham's life and make them relevant to me? And that's really what Musar teaches us to do in all stories of the Torah. So, for example, one of the things that we can learn from Abraham is that we know, obviously, the Torah makes a powerful point about the fact that he just finished circumcision, he was not well, and he was elderly, and despite that, he really wanted to invite guests, despite the fact that Hashem himself had tried to give him a break that day by making it extremely hot so that nobody would be coming to his door, and yet Abraham went out to look for guests. And when he finally saw the 3 people that were sent to him by Hashem to visit his home, he ran towards them himself. Now, that's a detail.